What's up, Flyin Squad? Welcome back to another episode of Flyin MMA Opinions and News. I am your host, Flyin Brian. Today we're going to be going through a variety of topics, including, but not limited to, looking back at UFC Fight Night 53 and 54, and also I'm going to preview Bellator 129. Other topics that I'm going to cover today are MMA's best commentators. I'm going to look back at Battleground MMA that was commentated by Chael Sonnen and J.R. Ross. I'm going to talk a little bit about Hector Lombard in the welterweight title elimination fight against Josh Burkman. Talk a little bit about Josh Burkman, and then I want to address Ben Askren. So getting things started, let's just start off by looking back at UFC Fight Night 53. Took place in Stockholm, Sweden, and for the most part, it was kind of lackluster. I wasn't too excited about the card. There wasn't that many names in the card, and Sweden did podunk. They went 0-for. They didn't have a single win. And afterward, there was a lot of people that were criticizing the Swedish fighters, and Alexander Gustafsson put out a statement or something like that, that he was, upset that we were criticizing them so much. But dude, you lose. What do you want from us? I'm not going to pat you on the back, say good job, things like that. Max Holloway put on a pretty damn solid performance against Akira Koryasani, and afterward he said that he thought the ref stopped it a little late and that he felt guilty for putting some extra punches in on Akira. But whatever, he looked pretty great, and he's actually looking for another fight again this year. So he's like the Cowboy Cerrone of the featherweight division. This guy's looking for his 5th fight this year. The main event of this card, they kind of threw Rick Story at Gunnar Nelson, and I'm sure that the UFC was hoping Gunnar Nelson would win. Local guy, and he's got a lot of talent, but that wasn't the case. Rick Story came in as the underdog, and Rick Story, it was a split decision victory for the Horror Story against Gunnar Nelson, but that one judge is crazy. Judges are always crazy. I think that Rick Story obviously won the fight. He was mixing in a lot of headshots with body shots, and Gunnar Nelson, like his facial expression, looked pretty lackluster. I don't understand why that guy doesn't ever change his facial expression. People that don't ever change their facial expression kind of weird me out. Also on that card, there was a light heavyweight fight versus Ilir Latifi. Jan Blachowicz, and Blachowicz KO'd Ilir Latifi with a TKO from a body kick. Not a good day to be from Sweden. And then that same day that card took place, we had UFC Fight Night 54. Again, it wasn't too exciting. There was a couple of fights that I was looking forward to, like Darren Cruikshank versus Anthony Njokuani. These guys are both pretty dynamic strikers. Basically, Darren Cruikshank beat Anthony Njokuani with wrestling. Darren Cruikshank is known for his spinning, crazy techniques, but this time he was able to negate Anthony Njokuani's offense with his wrestling. He did throw some of those spinning crazy techniques like I mentioned, but basically he won the fight with his wrestling, and the fight was not nearly as exciting as I anticipated it to be, with both guys being really dynamic strikers on paper. And then in the co-main event of the evening, Rafael Assunção put a whooping on Brian Caraway. It was a 30-27 decision. Assunção over Caraway. Assunção did not fishhook Caraway like I wanted him to, and he probably didn't take Miesha Tate away from Caraway, but he did win, and he probably did set himself up for a title shot down the road. Maybe he'll face the winner of TJ Dillashaw versus Dominic Cruz. We don't know. We'll have to see about that. While I'm at it, recently in the news, Miesha Tate has supposedly had some nudes leaked on the internet. You've heard about the fappening that happened. Somebody hacked into the iCloud and took a whole bunch of celebrities' nude photos that they had on their iCloud or on their phone, and they uploaded them to the internet, and it's called the fappening. Well, the fappening is continuing, and Miesha Tate is supposedly in the next batch of celebrities that has nude pictures going to be released on the internet. Right now, at this point, Miesha Tate's photos are being sold for $350 a piece. They're going for 1 Bitcoin, which I'm not even sure exactly what that is. I know that it's like internet currency, but 1 Bitcoin is like 350 US dollars, and each photo is going for 1 Bitcoin. So that's some crazy shit. $350 per picture of Miesha Tate. And then in the main event of UFC Fight Night 54, another guy that lacks facial expression, Rory Aries McDonald put a thumping on Tarek Saffiedine. It was a TKO in the 3rd round from a 1-2 combo over Tarek Saffiedine, but Rory McDonald controlled the whole fight up until the time that he knocked him out. And then after he knocked him out, he actually showed a little bit of emotion. He thumped his chest, gave us a little King Kong action, and then threw us a smile out. Some rare emotions coming from Rory Aries McDonald. While in the cage, Rory said that he thinks that he deserves a title shot against the winner of Johnny Hendricks versus Robbie Lawler. And then after the fight, the next day or something, he posted a picture of himself on Twitter holding a piece of cardboard that said, title shot or bust on it, and he asked the fans to please retweet it, and it got like 1,500 retweets, and he ended up getting himself a title shot, so he will be the next to face the winner of Johnny Hendricks versus Robbie Lawler for the welterweight title. Next up, we're talking about Battleground MMA, one-night tournament, throwing it back to the Pride days with the Grand Prix or, early UFC type of stuff. There was 8 men in one-night tournament with Joe Ray and Luigi Fioravanti, Brock Larson, Cody McKenzie, Ruan Carnero, Randall Wallace, Trey Houston, and Jesse Taylor. Now, for weigh-ins of this fucking Grand Prix tournament thing, Cody McKenzie was a pound over the 171-pound limit. So he came in at 172 pounds. And he had 1 hour to lose 1 pound in order to get into this tournament. And you know what the dude did? He donated blood to get down to weight. And this is the craziest shit I ever heard. This guy, is it even legal? It must have been legal. They let him do it. He donated blood to lose that pound. He made weight, and then he lost to Brock Larson in round 1. Round 1 of the tournament, round 2 of the fight, from a clock choke. So that's some crazy shit. Cody McKenzie's one weird dude. And the night finished off with Roan Carnero defeating Brock Larson via unanimous decision, 30-27 on all scorecards, to become the first ever Battleground MMA welterweight Grand Prix champion. And the night of the fights was commentated by the WWE's J.R. Ross and former UFC title challenger and shit talk extraordinaire Chael Sonnen. And I didn't get to watch the fights, but I heard that the highlight of it was, of course, Chael Sonnen and J.R. I'd like to look back at some of those highlights, but I didn't get to watch it. You hit me up on Twitter and tell me how you thought that it turned out. And that brings me to our next topic. I mentioned it on Twitter like a week ago that I wanted to get a poll going to see who the Flyin Squad, who all of the people that follow me on Twitter, everything that's involved with the Flyin Brian, who we think is the greatest commentator currently in MMA. And I've got a list started of people that might be the best commentator in MMA. It starts with, I threw J.R. Ross on the list because of the Battleground MMA thing that he just did. He made his MMA commentating debut. Chael Sonnen's on the list. Stephen Bonner, Jimmy Smith, Frank Shamrock, Hoist Gracie, John Anik, Pat Miletich. Pat Miletich is on Axis Fights every Friday. Kenny Florian, John Morgan from MMA Junkie, Frank Trigg, Michael Chiavallo, The Voice, Mike Goldberg, and in my opinion, the best commentator in MMA, Joe Rogan. I threw out this opinion of mine on Twitter when I was talking about it, and I had a lot of people giving me flack about Joe Rogan. He's the only guy that I want to listen to commentating my fights. The ones that I want to watch, I want Joe Rogan there every time. So in my mind, that makes him the best commentator in MMA. Mike Goldberg does a pretty good job. They play off each other pretty well, Mike Goldberg and Joe Rogan. But I'll make a poll, and we'll see who the Flyin Squad think is the best commentator in MMA. In my opinion, Michael Chiavallo has a super annoying voice, and I don't want to listen to that guy. Sure, he's got some great opinions, and his personality might be top-notch, but in my opinion, his voice is annoying. It'd almost be better to have Gilbert Gottfried announcing the fights than Michael Chiavallo. That's just my opinion. If he listens to this for some reason, I apologize. I don't want to fight him. But I don't like his voice, and that's just my opinion. Maybe you don't like my voice, and you're going to click off the podcast right now. But the rest of you, I'm sure my voice doesn't bother you too much. I like to describe my voice as a mixture of Gilbert Gottfried and Will Ferrell. So if you're keeping track, that means my voice is 1/3 Gilbert Gottfried, 1/3 Fergie, and 1/3 Jesus. Moving on, we got a UFC topic at hand. Hector Lombard is going to be getting his next fight against Josh Berkman. And a lot of people believe that Hector Lombard deserves a title shot, if he beats Josh Berkman. But now he's got to wait, in line behind Rory McDonald. And there's a lot of controversy surrounding this Hector Lombard versus Josh Berkman fight. Some of the things are, a lot of people are ducking Hector Lombard. Hector Lombard asked to face Tyron Woodley, and Tyron Woodley turned him down, supposedly. That was the controversy on social media, was that Tyron Woodley turned down a fight with Hector Lombard. And maybe he did, maybe he didn't, I don't know. Hector Lombard is a pretty solid competitor, so the UFC had to look outside of the UFC's welterweight division to find Hector Lombard a fight. And they got Josh Berkman, who was from the World Series of Fighting. And after Josh Berkman signed with the UFC, he sent out a tweet that was pretty suspicious. He basically implied that he lost his last fight in the World Series of Fighting in order to get into the UFC. Well, it wasn't his last fight that he lost in the World Series of Fighting, but he did lose the welterweight championship to Steve Carl, and he said that he had to do that because World Series of Fighting isn't going to release a champion. So that was suspicious, and that kind of that questions his character. His last fight was against Tyler Stinson, and he won in round 1 by KO. Anyway, he'll be facing Hector Lombard, and obviously the odds aren't out for that yet, but I'm sure that Hector Lombard will be the favorite. And so the UFC re-signed Josh Berkman, whose nickname is the People's Warrior. And I like talking about nicknames a lot. That's a stupid fucking nickname. What are you, The Rock? Is the audience a bunch of sixth graders? The People's Warrior? Whatever. I mean, maybe you like his nickname. I'm not a big fan. The People's Warrior. How do you self-dub yourself the People's Warrior? I don't understand. Does he have the most followers on Twitter? Where do you get this nickname from, guy? I guess it's going to be a lot better than Hector Lombard's nickname, which he recently changed it to Show Weather, because he says he shows weather no matter what the weather. I don't know. That's a stupid nickname, Show Weather. Yeah, that's right on par with Gunner Nelson. I think that's a stupid nickname too. Anyway, the re-signing of Josh Berkman calls my attention to we are still missing Ben Askren. Ben Askren is the current welterweight 170-pound champion of ONE FC, and he's still missing from the UFC. He's a former Olympic wrestler. He's a two-time All-American wrestler in college. He's an undefeated fighter. His last fight for the ONE FC championship belt, he beat a guy in like 45 seconds and took 0 damage. The reason why this guy isn't in the UFC is probably because he talks shit to Dana White on Twitter all of the time, and because some people perceive him as a boring fighter. I don't care if he's boring or not. I want Jake Shields back, to be honest with you. I don't care if they're boring or not. If they are the best in the business, I want them all under one roof, the UFC. I want all of the best people in the world in every weight class. I want them in under one promotion. You know, he's boring, but he wins, maybe. You know, we don't know. I want to see him against top competition. He was saying that he would beat Rory McDonald however the fuck he wants. And maybe you don't think he can. I'm not sure if he can beat Rory McDonald either, but I sure as fuck want to see him try. Why not put two of the best in the world in the cage at the same time together? I don't understand why he's still missing. I wish he was in it. And that guy's got a super cool nickname, Funky Ben. That's a cool nickname. I like Funky. Reminds me of Aljamain Sterling, the Funk Master, and he does Funk Jitsu. That's some pretty cool shit right there. While I'm at it, I didn't mention this in my opening about today's podcast, but I want to talk about the entrances. This weekend, I think it was Saturday, was Pride Fighting Championships' 15th year anniversary, and they had, the fighters would come out on a stage with screen in the background and maybe fireworks and shit. One time Anderson Silva danced through the cage acting like Michael Jackson. That's some cool ass shit. ONE FC does that right now. They have a similar thing. Before the main card starts, they brought out all of the fighters onto the stage, two at a time, standing next to the guy that you fight, then you go to an opposite side of the stage, and then there's the screen in the background playing highlights and stuff, and there's music going on, there's fireworks, and it's like a fucking rock concert on a stage that they walk out onto. That is way cooler than what UFC does, which is they just run out of the tunnel, acting all bad or whatever. That one time that Johnny Bones Jones did the Ray Lewis thing, that was pretty cool. But other than that, some of them, like Daniel Cormier, just runs to the cage. I guess that's like an athlete, but MMA is a spectacle. It's a spectator sport, really. And I think that would just add to the spectacle that is the UFC. So I'd like to see them transition to do something like that. They won't, though, because Dana White doesn't like to change anything. Real stubborn guy. Speaking of that, real fast, have you noticed that he hasn't been chirping too much lately? I heard that maybe the management, the Fertittas, told him to calm down a little bit and get his face off of everything, because there was a poll done recently that asked what you think the face of MMA is, and by a landslide, people thought that Dana White was the face of UFC, and that's not good for the sport, because he does nothing other than bitch and whine and call people out that don't have AVs on Twitter. Anyway, moving on. Now I'm going to do a quick run through of the entire Bellator 129 fight card, which takes place this Friday, October 17th, for the Mid-America Center in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and I will be there getting my first ever taste of Press Row. And the reason why I'm on Press Row is because of you guys. Thank you for following me on Twitter. If you're not following me on Twitter and you found this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher or Podomatic or my own website, which is flyinmma.com, please follow me on Twitter. I'm at FlyinMMA, and I'm going to this event on Press Row because of you guys, because of how many followers I have, because I have a very active Twitter account following MMA and various other things. I weaseled my way into it, and I'd like to thank you guys for helping me do that. So starting the night off, Bellator 129, we have Mike Estes, who's 31 years old, stands 5'9" tall. He's got a professional record of 6 wins and 2 losses. This fight will take place at 155 pounds. Estes' opponent is Ryan Shell. He stands 5'10" tall and has a professional record of 6 wins with 1 loss. And that 1 loss was by decision. Next up, we've got a welterweight fight between Marco Marquez, who is 5'3", stands 5'10" tall, versus Victor Moreno, who is 32-20, stands 6'3", and usually fights at 185 pounds. Next up, we've got a 185-pound fight between Brian Green, who is 30-19, stands 5'10" tall. He'll be facing Anthony Lionheart Smith, who is 6'4", has a professional record of 18 wins and 11 losses, and I'm going to be cheering for Anthony Smith quietly, though, because like I said, I'll be on press row. But Anthony Smith is from Nebraska. I'm from Nebraska. You got to stick with the hometown guys. And Anthony Smith's last fight, he defeated Victor Moreno. That's interesting. Next up, we've got a women's catchweight fight. It'll take place at 152 pounds. It is between Holly Lawson, who is making her professional MMA debut. She is a boxer, former professional boxer. She stands 5'6" tall. She is facing Josette, the #1 head buster, Cotton, who is 4-0 in her professional mixed martial arts career, and Holly Lawson's nickname is Lil Bear, so that's cute. Moving on, we have another catchweight fight. This will take place at 150 pounds between Martin Smash Brown, who is 5'11" tall, professional record of 7 wins, 2 losses. He's going up against Brian Corley, who has no nickname, 2 wins, 1 loss in his professional career. The next fight that is scheduled is a little bit misleading because Michael McBride, who is 6-1, does not have an opponent listed, but the fight is supposed to take place at 185 pounds. Next up, we've got the third catchweight fight of the night between Eric Hauser, who is 6-2, versus Timmy B. Baser. That's a dumbass nickname, but this guy makes up for it with a gnarly beard and some long flowing hair. Timmy B is 14-16. If in your mind there's a such thing as a main event of the prelims, this next fight is that. It's going to be a bantamweight fight between Chris Kid Chaos Lane and John Duvall. And Chris Kid Chaos Lane is my buddy on Twitter. He's always very active with me, talking back and forth about mixed martial arts. This dude is not only a fighter, but he is a fan as well. And he told me that leading up to this fight, he normally fights at 145 pounds, but this fight is at 135. He told me that the most difficult part of his weight cut was that he couldn't eat any barbecue. So I hope that this guy gets the win and then immediately goes and chows down on some ribs or a loaded baked potato or whatever this cat likes for barbecue. I myself, I'm more of a chicken guy, so I'd be on some wings with some sauce or some shit like that. Maybe some pulled pork sandwiches. Ooh, man, that shit's good. Anyway, his professional record is 11-12. Also, look him up on Twitter. He's at Kid Chaos MMA, and it's Kid, K-I-D, and then Chaos is spelled K instead of a C, K-H-A-O-S, MMA on Twitter. He's a really nice guy, and he doesn't have nearly enough followers for how active he is with talking to people about MMA. He's from Cedar Falls, Iowa. Chris Duvall is 5'10" tall, and his professional record is 8 wins with 6 losses. His losses are 2 of each, 2 from KO, 2 from submission, 2 from decision. Now we move on to the main card, which takes place on Spike TV. First fight of the main card, Bellator 129, is between Joe Vedepo, who is 16-8. He stands 6 foot, no inches tall. This fight is at middleweight. He's facing Devin Clark, who is 5'1" stands 5'10" tall. Next up, we've got a welterweight fight between Andre Chatuba Santos, who is 36-9, stands 5'11" tall. He is facing James Intensity Terry, who is 5'10" and has a professional record of 14 wins, 7 losses. Moving on to the co-main event of the evening, which will take place in the heavyweight division between Houston the Assassin Alexander and Virgil Resdog Zwicker. And Virgil is a late replacement. Houston Alexander was supposed to face an actual heavyweight fighter, James Thompson. Houston Alexander isn't an actual heavyweight fighter. I'm not sure. I'm not looking at it right now, but he fights at 205. He spent most of his career fighting at 205. I watched him in Kearney, Nebraska get knocked out by Gilbert Yvel at 205 pounds. And Gilbert Yvel, who is normally a heavyweight fighter, came down to 205 for that fight in Kearney, and he fainted after he weighed in at the 206 limit, and they had to lay him down and get him an IV so that he could get his fluids replenished and get him back to healthy. And then the following day, he knocked out Houston Alexander in the second round, and the whole crowd was cheering for Houston Alexander because it was in Kearney, Nebraska. Houston is a Nebraska native, and he got knocked out, so there wasn't much cheering for that. That was pretty sad. But so Houston was supposed to face James Thompson, who is normally a heavyweight fighter. And I thought, well, geez, Houston's going to get knocked out, no problem. This is going to be like a 45-second main event fight, or co-main event fight. But so he got his opponent switched to Virgil Zwicker, who is 12-4, stands 6 foot 2 inches tall, and normally fights at light heavyweight. So these are two normally light heavyweight guys going to be fighting at heavyweight. So expect them to come in around the 210 to 220 range on weigh-in day. Houston is 16-10 and stands 6 foot no inches tall, and the dude is 42 years old. So I mean, the Council Bluffs is just right across the river from Omaha, Nebraska, so it's damn near in Nebraska, just coming across the river to be attending these fights. And, you know, this guy probably needs to hang it up. I called for him to hang it up after he lost to Gilbert Yvel. And since that time, he lost to Jan Blachowicz, who I mentioned earlier, just recently defeated Ilir Latifi at UFC Fight Night 53. But then he had a couple of victories at Victory Fighting Championships, which is a kind of a local low-end deal. And then he lost to Vladimir Matyushenko via unanimous decision at Bellator 99. And then he did beat Matt Uday at Bellator 117 in a blackout fight. He got a TKO doctor stoppage at the end of round 2. And in the main event of the evening, we've got Josh Neer, who is from Des Moines, Iowa. He's got a professional record of 36 wins, 13 losses, and he is a UFC veteran with the nickname The Dentist, facing Paul Bradley, nicknamed The Gentleman, fighting out of San Diego, California. He's 5'9", has a professional record of 21 wins, 6 losses. Josh Neer's last victory was also for Victory Fighting Championships. I'm pretty sure that it's out of Omaha. I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty sure Victory Fighting Championships is out of Omaha. And he's recently beat another guy on the card, Anthony Smith. Josh Neer's on a 3-fight win streak, and Paul Bradley is 1-2 in his last 3. Most recently losing to Nathan Coy, unanimous decision at Bellator 112. So for this event, I will be there in person. I'm going to be bringing some extra equipment with me. You know, I'm borrowing an iPad from my niece, so thank you to Jordan for that. And I will be making some YouTube videos, getting up some video scrums. I'm going to try to ask some fighters some questions. I'm probably going to see if I can sit down with Kid Chaos after his victory, maybe go get some barbecue with him and talk about, you know, his training camp and stuff like that. And I'll get you guys some information on those types of things. Like I said, YouTube videos. I'm going to do some Twitter play-by-play. I'm going to throw some write-ups on my website, FlyinMMA.com. So look for all of those. That's all I've got for this episode of the podcast, Fight Fans. See you again next week. Thank you for listening. I'll throw some shout-outs out. Mighty with the MMA Made Show. Check him out every Thursday. The MMA Made Show comes out. It's hilarious. Mighty likes to call himself the jackass of MMA. Well, he says the jackasses of MMA, but Debo isn't having none of that shit. So it's just Mighty. Also, I'd like to throw a shout-out to my brother, Big C. Thank you for listening. Thank you to the Flying Squad. And good luck, Kid Chaos. Namaste.